Now, my inspiration for making this channel, Chael Sonnen, has reported that Nate Diaz has signed to fight. He's got a date. Okay. Now, what this video is going to be about is I'm going to speculate exactly who it should be. I'm going to speculate who it might be, and then I'm going to tell you who it should be, period. And the way I'm going to do it, this is everybody's favorite type of videos, according to the comments, is I'm going to lay out a bunch of fight game basics, just criteria that lead to how the UFC makes matches. And as a matter of fact, if the UFC matchmakers may end up getting their hands on this video, I will stand by that this is going to be an absolutely bulletproof argument for who I think it should be, but also I'll lay out who I think it might be, okay? So we got 4 options, and I'm gonna get into those in a second. Before I do that, if you like the content, subscribe and ring the bell, but only do that if you're going to be one of the smart people in the comments. Like I've been saying recently, I've been reading a lot of comments, and I'm literally blown away by the quality of the conversation. Like I'm taking comments that I'm reading and I'm turning them into entire videos. And that is because we are a community of hardcore MMA fans. And I love that. And the conversation demonstrates that down there. You don't need to just comment, reply to other people's comments. Someone says something tell them what you think. I'm telling you, I love it. Anyway, but yeah, if you want to join, subscribe, ring the bell, and we'll go from there. So here's the deal. So you got 4 options, okay? And we're going to go through each one of them. And I'm going to end with the one that it should be and exactly why, okay? So the first option is Conor, and I'll tell you why I think it's possible that it's Conor. And I'll first tell you why what plays against it, okay? And as a matter of fact, what we need to lay out here are what are the considerations for matching Nate with anyone, okay? Now, the UFC has a very standard criteria for a fighter who's on the last fight of their deal if they haven't re-signed or if they refuse to re-sign, right? Nate has made very clear he's not re-signing. Now, unless I am not privy to it, he didn't re-sign with the UFC, but we're going to operate under the assumption that that's the case because that was the case a week ago, right? So assuming that he hasn't re-signed and doesn't have a longer term contract, that means that he falls into the same criteria as everyone else who's on the last fight of their deal. And what is that? We've talked about this a million times. The goal of the UFC is to devalue that person. It's not disrespectful. This is a game of trading assets, okay? The reason why the UFC, one of the reasons the UFC is the premier organization on the planet is because they capture and keep all the stars, okay? The really big stars. There's a handful of people around the world who are big stars that the UFC doesn't have. Michael Venom Page comes to mind. That's the best example. Michael Venom Page, I promise you the UFC wants him. They want him bad. He's one of the only guys that really is a standout breakout star that's outside the UFC. I mean, there are other guys there are plenty of guys. There are guys in 1FC and stuff, but you understand the point I'm making. So if someone leaves the UFC, they immediately become a weapon that another organization can use against the UFC. Now, as recently as six years ago or something like that, the UFC was still very concerned about the ratings of the other guys. And I saw that again. I'm going to plug this video again in the Napoleon Blown Apart documentary about CM Punk. And they showed text messages that got, leaked from Dana to Lorenzo. And they were talking about stepping on the neck of Bellator because Bellator's ratings were going up while the UFC's were going down. And that was not, think about when CM Punk fought, dude. That was not that long ago where they were, where Dana and Lorenzo are strategizing specifically against Bellator. Now, that would seem relatively ridiculous in 2022, just at first glance, but that's because it's a constant battle. You have to keep your foot on their neck or else they will start capturing big stars and they'll become a problem. Imagine if Francis and Nate Diaz went to Bellator. Just think about just that. If Bellator just broke the bank and signed Francis, okay? I'm not suggesting that he would do that. But hypothetically, let's say that he did, right? So that and Nate Diaz, all of a sudden, everyone is going to watch those fights. Everyone's going to watch those fights. Bellator matters at that point. And so you have to, as you're about to lose a guy that you do not want to lose, you're trying to devalue them. You want them to lose. You want them to lose decisively. You do not want to send them out on a high note. Okay? So the reason why I think it's possible that it's Conor is because Conor is not behaving the way that he should if he's planning to come back and fight someone else. Like, as an example, Charles Oliveira has said very loud and publicly that he wants to fight Conor. He wants to wait and fight Conor. Chandler is talking about fighting Islam Makhachev, and so that Charles can wait and fight Conor. Very smart strategy by Chandler, by the way. And Conor's not responding. Like, he's not responding. You know what I mean? Like, if Conor has his eyes on fighting for the 155 belt, and Charles Oliveira is literally telegraphing that, why isn't Conor responding? Okay. Now, that's one of the only reasons that I will even entertain that it could be Conor, because that just seems like a blaring, weird occurrence. And I'm looking for pattern matches. And like, if he wants to fight, he should obviously be responding. But the UFC definitely does not want to send Nate Diaz out on a high note. Even because here's the thing, even if he loses to Conor, they'd be putting him in the center event of the biggest fight of the year. Of like it could be one of the biggest fights ever. And then so they send Nate Diaz out into free agency just coming off a Conor fight. There's no fucking way. Matter of fact, now that I'm saying out loud, there's no way. They won't do that. But I don't think they'll do that unless they look at it like, man, how many fights, like how good could Nate Diaz possibly be outside? This is how they could get there, actually. If they're like, okay, let's be honest. Nate's going to fight Conor. Then he's going to go fight Jake Paul. How many fights does he really have in him, honestly? Like how many, like, and if Nate Diaz is fighting nobodies, how big of a draw is he? You know, honestly, like, you know, this would be what I was thinking if I was them. Like, if they put him in there with some slapdick at 170 and, you know, in Bellator, are there any fights that would be interesting, you know? Because, like, that's the only way you can get there. And then you're like, are we really going to leave this money on the table? We're really not going to do the Conor and Nate fight that has this enormous, like, mega earnings. And if they've got revenue targets to hit for 2022 that they're not, or I guess this might be at the beginning of 2020, either way, that right there, that event by itself is equivalent to, you know, UFC 276 sold 400,000 pay-per-views. Think about that. International Fight Week sold 400,000 pay-per-views. Nate and Conor will do 1.5 million. Okay? That's like 4 pay-per-views in one show. 4. At the very least 3. It's definitely doing 1.2 without any shred of doubt. So you got 3 events in one. So are they going to leave that money on the table just to devalue Nate before he goes off and, you know, fights Jake Paul and then fights in, like, he has like 2-3 fights left maximum where he's, you know, at the very tail end of his career. That's why it's possible that it's Conor. Okay. So they would break their own rules about devaluing before. Now, the second option is Khamzat Chimaev, and that falls directly into the centerpiece of everything the UFC wants, right? Because the other thing that they want to do with Nate Diaz is they want someone to take his shine. If he's taking his shine somewhere else, they may as well have his shine bestowed on whoever he fights. That's why normally, under normal circumstances, the UFC has someone with the smallest name and the most danger beat the piss out of the guy who's leaving. You know, like again, Paige Van Zandt, they had her fight Amanda Ribas, right? Tyron Woodley, they had him fight Luque. Like, these are people who are incredibly dangerous fighters, but don't have a big profile. And so Khamzat, if they do, he already has such a big profile that if they do Khamzat, it's because they are absolutely certain that Khamzat will win. You know, like, they're looking at that matchup and they're betting everything on Khamzat. They're like, Khamzat will not lose to Nate Diaz. He will smash him into the ground. He'll take his shine, gives him another win. We could slide him straight into a title shot against Kamaru. The end. Okay, so that's why I think Khamzat is the most likely option. Okay, I think that's the most likely option. Now, the third option is someone like we talked about, where you could pick a multitude of options. Now, the fourth option is the one that I'm saying they should do, and we'll get to that in one second. But option 3 is they go with the tried and true template of a really dangerous fighter who doesn't have a big profile. Obviously, whoever you put up against Nate, you want them to have a lot of potential, though. So actually, option 4 is Kevin Holland. Okay, so I just talked myself into which one it is. It's Kevin Holland. Okay, so a guy who has tremendous upside as a value to the UFC. Tremendous upside. He's personable. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys. I've talked about him a bunch, dude. He gets into the octagon when you're there live, and you feel it, dude. You feel it different when he gets in there. So there's a possibility that's Kevin Holland. The only reason it wouldn't be is if they were afraid Nate might beat him, right? Because that's your worst outcome. If Nate beats a star on his way out. Whoever they put him up against, their betting is going to beat him, right? So it could be Kevin Holland. But here's option 4. Here's who they should do, okay? Here is exactly who they should do, and I'll tell you exactly why. You should do Masvidal. You should 100% do Masvidal. Absolutely no question whatsoever. And I'll tell you exactly why. The UFC matchmaking is all about making bets for the UFC. The UFC is making bets when they matchmake, right? Like we talked about this a bunch with O'Malley. We're like, O'Malley, they're going to give him whoever has the highest upside in terms of elevating his career with the lowest, risk of him losing. Period. Point blank. Period. Okay. Now that's how you handle up and coming guys, superstars that are on their come up. That is the recipe. And you're gambling that they'll beat the guy that you put them up against. Okay. Now there's the other side of the gamble, right? This is the game once as you're elevating from unranked up to a position where they could potentially, challenge for the title. But once you get up here, now you got a different game. And it's about positioning the superstars for title shots, okay? Because now by here, they're stars. Now anyone who wins the belt becomes a much bigger star, but you're positioning for your highest draw to fight for the title, period. And that's why Conor can come off a bunch of losses and just walk straight into a title shot because he's such an enormous draw that they don't even have to pretend that there's a game anymore about well, does he deserve it? Does he not deserve it? Conor is above looking down on the entire organization, and they don't even have to pretend that's not the case. With everyone else, they have to justify title shots, okay? And so with Masvidal coming off 3 straight losses, I would imagine people were like, it's ludicrous. There's no way that Masvidal's fighting for the title. Certainly not after one fight. That's not true. I'll tell you that right now. That's not true. If you have Masvidal fight against Diaz, okay, and you have a blockbuster fight, huge blockbuster fight, which will do enormous numbers, close probably to the Conor one. Not all the way there, but close, okay? You have that fight go off, and you have Masvidal win by stoppage, okay? Or at the very least, just absolutely pulverize Nate Diaz for 5 rounds, which is exactly what happened in the first one. He was getting tired in the 4th and 5th, but he wasn't that tired, dude. Just because he went like this after the 3rd round, he's getting air, man. He's just, he's getting air. That doesn't mean he doesn't have anything left. He's going, so the point is, if he beats Nate Diaz in that fight, and Leon beats Kamaru, you can walk Masvidal straight into a title shot. Now, if Kamaru beats Leon, of course, you're not walking Masvidal back into a title shot. But if Leon pulls off this fight against Kamaru, and then Masvidal beats anyone, literally anyone, because bottom line, and this is, I will absolutely guarantee you this, that at Paradigm Sports, okay, by the way, Sean Strickland and Izzy are at Paradigm? Did you know that? Starts to make you think. It's like, I wonder if they, were in cahoots on building a big fight. Nonetheless. But one thing that for sure you're going to get at Paradigm is you're going to get excellent advice for strategy and how to matchmake and who to say and all that. Now, Leon Edwards, without being disrespectful, is at the absolute very bottom of the UFC in terms of his mic skills. He's on the very top in terms of his fight skills. But on the mic, it's not something that comes naturally to him. It just is what it is, man. Some people do have it, some people don't. Some people can literally just sit down, you give them a topic, and they'll make it interesting and compelling no matter what it's about. And other people, you could be like, tell me a story about when 5 guys were trying to rob your mother and you beat 4 of them to death. And then you're like, 4 sentences in, you're like, Jesus, this is boring, man. He's just one of those guys, dude. It just is what it is. However, it's irrelevant because Paradigm is going to say, this is what you say after you win, Leon. This is what you say. And if I know that his biggest payday and lowest risk is against Masvidal, you can guarantee that Conor and Audi know that too, okay? And so they will tell him, if you win, you scream into the microphone, I want Street Judas. I want Masvidal. I've got a fight that I need to get back. Give me Masvidal. Because if he demands it, the UFC will respond, because the UFC wants to give Masvidal that fight, period. Like, you believe me, there is no question, absolutely no question, that if you ask the UFC, okay, so what's your best case scenario? You know, let's say you put Masvidal against fill in the blank and you have Leon and Kamaru go off. What's your best case scenario? They're going to say Leon and Masvidal win, and so we can do that title shot. And it's all about numbers. That's it. It's just about numbers. Leon beats Kamaru. They already got the pay-per-view for that one, right? And then so the next fight, if you do Kamaru versus Leon rematch versus Masvidal versus Leon, you know, rematch from the backstage, there's no question that that sells tremendously more. Probably 400,000 or 500,000 pay-per-view buys more. Not because Kamaru isn't a big draw. It's because not because Kamaru is not a big draw, but because Masvidal is a fucking enormous draw, second only to Conor, right? And the numbers prove that. Like, the numbers prove that now. Like, Izzy has the second biggest contract next to Conor. He fought in the main event and pulled 400,000 pay-per-view buys. I mean, that just is what it is, dude. Those are hard metrics. I love Izzy, dude. I'll always buy his fucking pay-per-views. But in terms of the metrics, that's measurable and that's simple, and that's exactly what it was. He did 400,000 pay-per-view buys on on International Fight Week with Holloway and Volkanovski as the undercard, the entire card stat, 400,000 buys. Okay, if Masvidal is headlining that, you do 800,000 buys easily. And I mean, I don't know what Masvidal and Colby did, but like they do big numbers. When Masvidal filled in and fought against Kamaru at Fight Island, he did 1.3 million buys. Now he's cooled off a little bit since then, but not that much. Not that much. So especially if he's coming off another fight with Nate Diaz, though, like that's where you get him back to 1.3 million buys. You haven't beat Nate Diaz, you haven't fight against Leon, it'll be a fucking bonanza. And so if the UFC is not matching Masvidal with Diaz, which it looks like they're not, because Masvidal is going back and forth with Gilbert Burns for a fight, then they should be. Plain and simple. I'm talking per your rules, you should be. Because, I mean, the only way that you would think that's a bad call is if you think Nate's going to beat him. And do you think Nate's going to beat him? Masvidal beat the shit out of Nate for fucking 3 straight rounds. You know? Like, I mean, both of them got a couple years older, but who do you think aged better? Right? Like, Masvidal is a near shoo-in to win that fight. Okay? So, per your rules and per the way you set things up, and like, if people think that this is not how it goes, okay? Why do you think Kamaru Usman fought Masvidal twice and then Colby? Okay, it's because they had 3 opportunities to set up a Masvidal and Colby for the title shot, and then as soon as they all lost, they canceled the Leon Edwards and Masvidal fight so that they could do Colby and Masvidal without risking Masvidal taking a loss. I predicted that right. For those of you guys who were around, the day after Colby lost to Kamaru, I came on and I did a video and I said, the real reason UFC is going to cancel Leon versus Masvidal. And 48 hours later, they canceled Leon versus Masvidal. And they said, oh, it's undisclosed injury. It's not an undisclosed injury. They're not going to risk their Colby and Masvidal, super fight to have Masvidal fight Leon when the only reason he's fighting Leon is so they could justify a title shot against Colby if Colby was able to beat Kamaru. Period. That's why Dustin Poirier versus Conor happened, because they're trying to justify a Conor title shot against, Khabib. Which in hindsight, they should have just done Conor versus Khabib, although Khabib did retire. But they assumed that Conor would beat Dustin based on their previous fight and based on, Dustin's style. So that is exactly what they do, period. Like, there's just absolutely no conversation. That is how the UFC match makes when you get to that level. And so per their rules, Nate Diaz should be fighting Masvidal. End of story. Anyway, that is what I've got. I love you guys. And peace.